second. All right, Pumpkins, we got the footage. Someone in the Discord last name named Joe Tron said the rare is up. Actually, it's Rolaz. It's Rolaz right here. It's this guy. It's this hunter right here. Rolaz last night told me in Discord the rare was up 9:30 p.m. I hit up my friends Asloff and Hodzar. They make a group. They summon me out. And it drops. I decided to record everything because I knew people would think it would be Elon Musk piloting me. And hey, I don't blame you guys. So let's play the recording, huh? Bro, I was so fried. All right, I was so fried. All right, here it is. Here it is. These are the receipts. Okay, I'm just gonna play this. I think.
Triangle.
You've got
okay.
him?
He is. Yep. I'll get near him.
What we'll want to find is an area where there's like next to the water or something where there's no mobs.
Just in case I'm on a different layer, it's a good idea. Yeah.
There's water up north here, so we can.
Actually, I have Nova World buffs. I could also just make sure I'm on the right layer. I was really scared, guys, to get summoned on the wrong layer. Because if I got summoned, like, think about this. If I got summoned on the wrong layer, I would just be summoned. They wouldn't be around me, and I would die. Like, that could literally happen, right? Anyway, so I was really nervous.
Bruh.
Nice blink.
The layer wasn't working, and my add-on wasn't working, so I don't know what layer I was on. If you summon me in the water where I'm safe, even if I'm on the wrong layer.
You'll be right next to the water. So if you need to jump into the water, it is
100% safe.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah, it should be.
Let's do it.
All right, here we go.
What's going on?
Let's do it. It's a little weird. I can't see what layer I'm on.
Oh, guess what? Staff just dropped and.
Are you gonna take my troll away like that?
Alright, ready?
Yep.
Alright, I'm accepting it. 3, 2, 1, now. Okay, nice.
There you are.
Holy crap.
Alright, let's let him tag it.
Yeah, let me tag it, and then you can keep group loot. I obviously trust you guys.
Yeah. So let me just pull him over here.
Bro, imagine.
I'm gonna shackle the other guy.
I didn't get the tag yet. I'm gonna keep shooting with my bow. I miss. I mean, I shouldn't need to. Okay, I got it. Got the tag. Alright, kill it.
Kill it.
Please.
Drop!
No!
Oh
That looks pretty nice. Neat on that. BOE.
Go!
Man, off stream too. What a moment.
I'm recording this. I'll show this on stream tomorrow.
Let's go. Oh, watch out.
Okay.
Four.
Congrats, Czar.
Holy, yo, thank you so
congrats,
much,
man.
There's
Let's
no
go.
way.
I'm
The
glad you saw
Polarized
messages
is dead.
that we can summon you out. That's great.
Wow, I messaged Asloff and Hogsar. Probably like locked in.
Yup.
Dude,
I'm
I just
glad
did
we
my
could help
first
with that.
strat ever. My heart was pounding.
Yeah, we got Aslov through strat. He almost died. Yep.
I did almost die, actually. 30%. Tanking blackguards.
All right.
52.
No,
Alright, 3 more
give him a
levels
port.
and you can use that bad
Give him
boy.
a port before
Yeah,
something else spawns here.
Yeah,
get him the fuck
go
out
to
of here.
Undercity, Asloff.
City.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I'm recording this too, so we can. I'm like sitting in my room with my camera on, so they know it's not like Elon Musk piloting me. Holy crap, this is sick. Thanks, guys. Holy crap. I can't believe it. This is gonna make the rest of the run so legit, because I'm gonna look. I mean, it's good, but I also look like a samurai.
How much more damage are you gonna do?
It'll probably. Up top end goes from 124 to 194. So deep. All right, guys, and there it is. It was not Elon Musk, okay? It was me the whole time. We got the footage. I even turned my webcam on in the dark because, like, it kind of... Would the footage really be the same if my webcam wasn't on? You know what I'm saying? Would the footage have really been the same if my webcam was off? It would have been like, well, this could have been footage forwarded from someone else. Chat. We got it.
Talk to me.
We got the song played. Crazy. Shout out to Joe in the Discord for hitting me up last night, letting me know the rare was up on which layer. Shout out to Asloff and Hodzar and Texas and Lorette for summoning me out there safely and killing the mob. Let's go, boys. I can't believe it. Oh, yeah, dude, this is just going to make the run so much more fun because I'm going to look like a samurai. I'm legit going to have a samurai sword. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be huge.
On October 22nd, 2024, Blizzard celebrated an impressive anniversary. 20 years of World of Warcraft. And with that celebration came a huge announcement. Oops. Sorry. On October...
It is a good day.
I talked to Elon last night, and he told me today was going to be a special stream.
That is right, Bongo. Elon hooked it up heavy, man. You guys have heard correctly. We have the footage as well. We got the song blade, my friends. We got the song blade. Let me just log in and show you guys. First thing, yes. Oh, we got it, man. We got the song blade. Chat, last night, someone in the Discord.
Streaming equals cheating. Must delete XD.
We got the footage. I'll show it here in a second. All right, pumpkins, we got the footage. Someone in the Discord last night named Joe Tron said the rare is up. Actually, it's Rolaz. It's Rolaz right here. It's this guy. It's this hunter right here. Rolaz last night told me in Discord the rare was up 9:30 p.m. I hit up my friends Asloff and Hodzar. They make a group. They summon me out and it drops. I decided to record everything because I knew people would think it would be Elon Musk piloting me. And hey, I don't blame you guys. So let's play the recording, huh? Bro, I was so fried, all right? I was so fried. All right, here it is. Here it is. These are the receipts, okay? I'm just gonna play this, I think.
There we go. Triangle.
You've got
okay.
him?
He is. Yep. I'll get near him.
What we'll want to find is an area where there's like next to the water or something where there's no mobs.
Just in
Yeah.
case I'm on a different layer, it's a good idea, yeah.
But there's water up north here, so we can.
Actually, I have Nova World buffs. I could also just make sure I'm on the right layer. I was really scared, guys, to get summoned on the wrong layer. Because if I got summoned, like, think about this. If I got summoned on the wrong layer, I would just be summoned, they wouldn't be around me, and I would die. Like, that could, literally happen, right? Anyway, so I was really nervous.
Bruh.
Nice play.
The layer wasn't working, and my add-on wasn't working, so I don't know what layer I was on. If you summon me in the water where I'm safe, even if there's a I'm on the wrong layer.
You'll be right next to the water, so if you need to jump into the water, it is
100% safe.
Strength
Alright,
and
cool.
Yeah.
honor.
Let's do it.
Never done.
There we go. What's going on?
Let's do it.
For the Horde!
It is a little weird. I can't see what layer I'm on, but
Oh, guess what? Staff just dropped and.
Are you gonna take my troll away like that?
Oh,
alright,
no!
ready?
Yeah, we're.
Yep.
Let's see. If you...
Alright, I'm accepting it in 3, 2, 1, now. Okay, nice.
There you are.
Holy crap.
All right, let's let him tag it.
Yeah, let me tag it, and then you can keep group loot. I obviously trust you guys.
Yeah. So let me just pull him over here.
Bro, imagine.
I'm gonna shackle the other guy.
I didn't get the tag yet. I'm gonna keep shooting with my bow. And miss. I mean, shouldn't need to. Okay, got it. Got the tag. Alright, kill it. Please.
Rob!
No!
Oh
That looks pretty nice. Lead on that. BOE.
Go!
Man, off stream too. What a moment.
How much would
I'm
that
recording this.
sell
I'm recording this.
for?
I'll show this on stream tomorrow.
Let's go! Oh, watch out!
Okay.
Four.
Congrats, Czar.
Holy, yo, thank you
Yeah,
so
congrats,
much,
man.
guys.
Dude.
There's
Let's
no
go.
way.
That is I'm
The
glad you saw
prototype is
messages
dead.
that we can summon you out. That's great.
Wow, that's it. I messaged Asloff and Hodzar instantly. I'm like, you guys are probably like locked in.
Yup.
Dude, I
I'm
just
glad
did
we
my
could help
first
with that.
strat ever. My heart was pounding.
Yeah, we got Aslov through strat. He almost died.
I did almost die, actually. 30%. Tanking blackguards.
All right.
52. All right, 3 more levels, and you can use that bad
Give him
boy.
a point before
Yeah.
someone else spawns.
Yeah,
Yeah, get him the fuck
go
out of
to
here.
Undercity. I'm recording this too, so we can. I'm like sitting in my room with my camera on, so they know it's not like Elon Musk piloting me. Thanks, guys. Holy crap! I can't believe it. This is gonna make the rest of the run so legit, because I'm gonna look. I mean, it's good. But I also look like a samurai.
How much more damage are you gonna do?
It'll probably. The top end goes from 124 to 190. So deep. All right, guys, and there it is. It was not Elon Musk, okay? It was me the whole time. We got the footage. I even turned my webcam on in the dark because like it kind of would the footage really be the same if my webcam wasn't on. You know what I'm saying? Would the footage have really been the same if my webcam was off? It would have been like, well, this could have been footage forwarded from someone else. Chat. We got it. We got the song played. Crazy. Shout out to Joe in the Discord for hitting me up last night, letting me know the rare was up on which layer. Shout out to Asloff and Hodzar and Texas and Lorette for summoning me out there safely and killing the mob. Let's go, boys. I can't believe it. Oh, yeah, dude, this is just gonna make the run so much more fun because I'm gonna look like a samurai. I'm legit going to have a samurai sword. It's gonna be amazing. It's gonna be huge.
On October 22nd, 2024, Blizzard celebrated an impressive anniversary. 20 years of World of Warcraft. And with that celebration came a huge announcement. Oops. Sorry, wrong announcement.
We are so pleased to announce that we are bringing you the classic experience.
The announced release of World of Warcraft Classic for me is a frustrating one. It feels like we're giving Blizzard a pat on the back and a good job, sport, for creating a solution to a problem that they themselves created. We're supposed to be excited for what? A game that's already came out 5 years ago? The continued rehashing of World of Warcraft at this point is soulless and sad. And I just wish Blizzard would make a good predecessor to World of Warcraft in the form of WoW 2 or WoW Classic Plus. The recent direction Blizzard has taken with Classic Fresh just feels like an extension of the laziness we've seen from them over the years. And that's especially true pertaining to their handling of World of Warcraft Classic and the now countless subgenres it's seen over the years. Is anyone else tired of this? Does anyone else just want Blizzard to make a good version of the game? Instead, they're choosing to milk nostalgia and trade their reputation that they have built over decades of high quality, innovative games for an easy buck. I want to explain what I mean by that. But first, let me walk you through some background. If you've ever played Vanilla WoW, or if you played the 2019 retake on that experience as World of Warcraft Classic, you likely have an understanding of what it means to experience a vintage version of World of Warcraft. It looks like limited classes with a specific and realized class fantasy. It looks like an open-ended adventure in a harsh world where the player isn't exactly the savior of the universe. You're just a person in it. It's simple but fulfilling, and the engaging systems in the game reward you for, well, playing the game. But above all, it's adventure and community that make this world. And in many people's minds, that vintage WoW experience that I just described is synonymous with the first 3 expansions of the series, World of Warcraft Vanilla, The Burning Crusade, and Wrath of the Lich King. And the general consensus is, after that, the games start going downhill. Before we had that classic WoW experiment in 2019, that by the way is still continuing to this day, players often consider those original 3 expansions to adhere to the defining elements of the vintage WoW era. However, as that classic project progressed through Vanilla and to Wrath of the Lich King, it became increasingly clear that Vanilla and TBC truly are set apart as a good representation of a classic experience of World of Warcraft. As you move into Wrath of the Lich King, and particularly the later stages of that expansion, the game starts to drift away from what most players would perceive as classic. Even at its foundation, Wrath, while undeniably fun and the population key to the game, it begins to depart from the essence of the original classic experience. And there's many different ways we see that. We see that in the looks of the game, for example. We see that in the multi-tiered raid difficulties that begin here. Difficulty that begins to stratify reward structures in the game, furthering the gap between good and bad players. We also see it in the form of abandonment of lower level open world content. Systems were implemented to streamline leveling in the form of the first ever bound to account items. These items boost your base experience, letting you skip almost half the game, that is, leveling up. There's also the problem of the expansion zones that isolate the highest level players to that respective expansion's area, leaving the leveling world feeling empty and smaller than ever. Not only that, but in Wrath of the Lich King we also see the shift in the idea of what is in-game content for players. Blizzard during this expansion has a big push focusing on raids as end-all be-all in-game content for players. And lastly, the vibe check of Wrath of the Lich King the second time around just didn't quite hold up to either of the previous expansions. It didn't feel like classic anymore. And as it turns out, Wrath of the Lich King marks for me the threshold where World of Warcraft begins to evolve from the old game into the new game. And if Wrath is the subtle transition, Cataclysm is the complete flip of the switch. The world, the vibe, the mechanics, there's no way this game is the same game as this. And the numbers actually bear this out. If you compare the player base of Vanilla, TBC, and Wrath of the Lich King to Cataclysm, for example, the drop-off in player engagement is significant. This decline shows that players are not as invested in the classic project as it ventures further into expansions that feel more aligned with the modern version of the game. So, it feels kind of weird to keep calling a game Classic World of Warcraft when it doesn't feel classic anymore. It's just the next stop on this train that, frankly, not a lot of people want to be on. The reason I bring this up is because when a development company is trying to determine its direction for a game, it's essential to consider what the game is and what the game is meant to be. What the game is sort of the nuts and bolts of the game. However, what the game is meant to be comes to fruition through the form of players engaging in that game and the result of that interaction. In Blizzard's case, their decision to simply re-release the same expansions in the same order, one after another, feels increasingly disconnected from the essence of what they claim to be creating, which allegedly is a classic experience, a recreation of the vintage experience that the original games produced back in the day.
We're committed to making an authentic classic experience. We want to reproduce the game experience that we all enjoyed from the original classic WoW, not the actual launch experience.
However, we know now that the vintage experience of World of Warcraft cannot be achieved by simply just re-releasing the game as it was back in the day. And honestly, it never could have been. We know that because those who played Vanilla WoW when it originally launched can attest that while Classic is roughly the same game in terms of content and design, due to Blizzard's no changes philosophy, the way it's played today is fundamentally different. Gaming and the way people play have evolved dramatically. These days, players focus on figuring out the most efficient ways to win, and they're much more skilled and knowledgeable about just how games work in general. They are goal-orientated and focused. And because Blizzard has already given players an official version of Classic in 2019, we know how specifically World of Warcraft Vanilla is different now than it was back in the early 2000s. Just to name some major differences: raiding, the economy, engagement, and culture are all extremely different and make the game today a completely different experience. Raiding is a main pillar of in-game content. It is designed as the final challenge for players in regards to in-game difficulty, and back in the day, that's exactly what it was. In the original version of the game, Cthulhu, the last boss in 1840, lived for 113 days before he was defeated. In the Burning Crusade, Kael'thas from Tempest Keep lived 130 days before being defeated. And in Wrath of the Lich King, heroic Lich King lived for 46 days before finally being taken out. However, in the classic versions of the game, these bosses were all defeated within 2 hours of the raid release. As a matter of fact, every single raid to have ever been released in Classic through to Wrath of the Lich King were completely cleared first day with 0 wipes from the teams that cleared first. Sometimes this was done even within the hour of release. Talk about a big difference in skill and knowledge. Because these fights are all solved, the mechanics are all known, and the optimization is complete, before players even enter the raid, they already know the exact best team comps to take in for the raid, and even have special add-ons that are already preloaded with all the directions to kill each boss. Raiding in Classic becomes a game of seconds, where most boss fights last under a minute, and everything is completely solved. With the challenge gone, and every single micro decision already accounted for, it leads to one of the biggest problems in Classic: culture. Because the game has existed for 20 years, and there is a guide for absolutely everything, the endgame is completely solved, and advanced combat logs exist in the game, players have developed what you can call a culture of min-maxing. In raids, guilds and pugs alike force players to play the most optimal classes, the most optimal specializations, use the most optimal consumables, and play in the most optimal way possible. Going outside of what is best is often, to say lightly, frowned upon. Players min-max the game not because it's hard, they do it because they want to see this number go up on a third-party platform, and they've been told by the culture of the WoW community that they need to adhere to these soft rules of the game. Because of this, thousands of players that either don't have as much experience with the game or want to choose to play a suboptimal class, they've been pushed out of the community. And while there was always a min-maxing culture, that culture used to be limited to higher tiers of gameplay. But in the modern era, that mindset has spread to even casual players of the game. And because of that, a lot of people have just left the game because they don't want to deal with it. One of the things that makes WoW special is the time it takes to do things. It's a good and a bad thing. The current time to level in WoW Classic Vanilla is estimated to be anywhere between 120 to 300 hours for a casual player. After you level up, you need to grind gear, complete prerequisites to enter the raids, maybe level up your professions, and acquire the gold it takes to complete all of the above. There's almost no way to quantify the time it takes to do this, but if you were doing it at maximum efficiency, it probably takes you somewhere between 120 to 300 hours per player. Then after you complete all of this, you can pretty much do any content you want, but most players will also partake in the raiding scene, which will require you to partake in additional time sinks. Acquiring all the world buffs for the raid requires you to fly around the world for maybe an hour or two alone each week. Maybe you have to prep consumables or farm for them. And then there's the act of actually raiding, which likely you are cutting out 2 to 4 hours at least 1 day a week to raid. Maybe even 2 days a week if you're doing multiple raids or have multiple characters. My point by going through all of this is if you play this game, you are not jumping on for 30 minutes then getting off. you are playing for hours, because this game requires an extreme amount of time to do just about anything. And while the game has always been this way, I think people in the modern era value time differently than they did back in the early 2000s. Time nowadays, to almost anyone, has some sort of monetary attachment to it. The question of farming gold or leveling up a new character is not a proposition of fun or achievement. It's often one of a monetary value proposition. Should I spend 10 hours leveling up, or should I pay this scrupulous mage 1 hour of gold farming to boost me in Scarlet Monastery? Should I spend 2 hours farming 10 gold, or should I work an extra hour at work and just buy 30 gold? Should I lead this raid group of random players and just hope that the gear that I want drops, or should I reserve items on the run to make leading this group worth my time? Players in the modern era just think of playing games differently. And again, I'm not saying this didn't exist back in the day, but it just feels like a lot more players played the game just because they loved playing the game back then. But now, more players attach a dollar and cents value proposition to the game. Which brings me to my last point, the economy. Because of that value proposition that we just talked about, buying gold in this game has completely taken over. There have been numerous videos on this subject, and I am fairly confident in saying that the gold buying black market for WoW is worth millions of real life dollars. And while the gold market existed back in the day, it's nowhere near as rampant as it is in the modern game. And a large reason for that is due to AI botting and the power of mages being able to solo farm dungeons with ease. Something that did exist in the original versions of the game, but is nowhere close to as widespread as it is now. The amount of raw gold injected into the economy is absolutely insane. Combine this with the fact that in-game rewards from non-mage farms have not kept up in value, you have a recipe for serious inflation in the market. And as a result, that value proposition of gold buying becomes extremely enticing. For example, in Season of Discovery, one of the easiest and quickest gold farms for a hunter is a Dire Maul tribute run. And if we're being generous, they will net you about 100 to 200 gold per hour, and still requires a decent amount of skill to pull off. Or, alternatively, you can go on this website and spend $6 plus tax on 1,000 gold right now. You don't have to be a genius to realize that that is a problem. And so, with all these problems that we know the game is going to have, because we have already seen this story, we know how it ends. Why would anyone, besides people that have something to gain or just really truly love the game, be excited for the exact same rehashed, minimal changes, lazy re-release of a game that has already came out twice? A game that already exists as legacy servers. A game where absolutely none of the above issues that I laid out will be solved in any capacity. Why can't Blizzard release classic WoW where raids are brand new and not just reimagined but completely redesigned? With new mechanics, new loot, a new look, a new experience, but they still maintain that classic WoW feel. It's not impossible. Look at OSRS, for example, that has continued to innovate the classic version of their game. Why can't the endgame in WoW be expanded on to include large successes from previous versions of the game, like Arena, like achievement points, like solo shuffle, like legendary questlines? Why can't they fix the server so that large-scale PvP can actually be played instead of being a 2 frame per second lag fest? Why can't they implement systems so that world PvP isn't a grief fest? Why can't the game remove add-ons like Weakors that play the game for you? Why can't the modern WoW quest guide and the customizable interface be implemented into the classic version of the game so that players don't need add-ons for bare minimum quality of life adjustments? Why can't some classes get the small changes they need to not necessarily completely change the meta, but make them actually useful? Why can't leveling be just a little bit faster? Not so that players miss the magic of what makes vanilla WoW amazing, but so they can actually play at a decent pace. Why can't flight points be 50% faster? Why can't mounts be just 20% faster? Why can't we just remove world buffs or at least change how they work? They cause far more problems in the endgame, even though they're really freaking cool. Why can't we honor the integrity of the game by banning gold buyers and sellers both? Why can't Blizzard see all the bots in the game and remove them? Why can't we remove the ability for mages to solo farm entire dungeons and inject infinite building to the economy? Why can't Blizzard just take what they've learned over the years and make a game that the community wants to play? And for all that, I am frustrated with the announcement of a fresh classic. and I'm frustrated with Blizzard. You know, the hard thing, the ambitious thing, would have been to truly attempt to recreate the classic experience, not merely by re-releasing the game as it was, but by innovating the game, creating new challenges and systems that evoke the spirit of the original era, and build on lessons learned from all of these versions of the game, all the while making sure to not leave behind what makes the vintage era of WoW so great and memorable for so many people. And of course this is an impossible task, of course it's risky, and of course you can't just man that ship with any old game developer. You need people that love the game, you need people that are creative, and you need a concrete idea of not only what you're trying to do, but most importantly a plan on how to get there. Maybe Blizzard has come to know this already, that no matter what they do, they can't recreate a classic experience. Maybe players aren't looking to replay the game itself. Maybe they're actually seeking to relive a time in their lives that no longer exists. They're chasing a feeling, a moment that's just fundamentally gone. It calls to mind, you think you do, but you don't. However, Blizzard could take those steps to bring players closer to that ideal classic experience. Instead, though, they've chosen to repeatedly re-release the same game over and over again. They fall back on this cycle because it's easy and profitable. There's always someone who will look at a particular version of World of Warcraft and think, wow, that was a great time. I'd love to experience that again. And it seems like Blizzard knows this. The release of Kata, and what will be the release of Mists of Pandaria, and now the new era of, unironically, WoW Classic. All of these releases prove this idea, and from what I've seen, they will continue this lazy development cycle as long as players choose to keep allowing it to happen. You know, a wise man once said, WoW players love to eat shit. And unfortunately, for me, I think I'm full. I've been Java Monkey J. Thanks for watching. Peace.
Over its 20-year duration, the World of Warcraft has kept getting bigger and bigger. Whether it was through major patches, updates, or entire expansions, MMOs are games that have to keep progressing and growing to fulfill the living, breathing worlds which they are supposed to be. And a core part of any MMO's growth in size will be the new zones for players to explore. Zones are like the building blocks which everything is placed upon, from gathering, questing, dungeons to raids. Everything takes place within the zones of the game. So we're going to need a lot of zones for a game that's been around this long. And while some of the zones in the game are hallmarks of incredible world building and fantasy creation, others are, well, not quite as well remembered, shall we say. And that's what I want to talk about today. What for me was the worst zone of every WoW expansion so far. For this, we're going to be going in order of zone preference from least bad to what I consider avoid if possible, but I do have to pick one zone per expansion of World of Warcraft, and trust me, some of these were really hard choices to make. We will begin with World of Warcraft's 4th expansion, and soon to be one which we will be revisiting in Classic, Mists of Pandaria. Now, to be honest, Mop didn't really have a bad zone pretty much at all, which makes it rather difficult to pick here since I have to, but if I do have to choose one, I think it'll be the Krasarang Wilds. This is a zone towards the south of Pandaria that you'll get to a bit later when leveling, but one that's always at the same time felt a bit optional to me, and that you don't really need to be there for all that long in order to get to level 90. So what were the problems with it? Well, for me the zone could feel a bit claustrophobic at times with all the trees which are there, and there are small rivers everywhere and just bits of water that you could accidentally run into. There also weren't any raids or dungeons, so oftentimes you just didn't really need to be here all that much. And I do remember some of the quests were rather annoying to complete as well. All in all though, not a terrible zone by any stretch of the imagination, but if I've got to pick one, that's what I'm going for Mists of Pandaria. Next up is the entry from Legion. Now Legion as a whole probably had some of the best zones we have ever seen in World of Warcraft. And and were it not for the content added in later patches, I'm really not overly sure what I'd be picking here, but for Legion my choice will be the Antoran Wastes. Added towards the end of the expansion, this zone was part of us going to Argus to confront the Legion directly, and as you might imagine, Argus was not really a very nice place to be, so in some ways I guess Blizzard did a good job here. I think Crocun and the Antoran Wastes are somewhat similar here, in that they both have the same kind of landscapes, high mob density, no flying allowed, lots of obstacles to get over or around, and so on. There were plenty of good reasons to go there though, from the daily quests, the new raids or dungeons, and of course the invasion points, which allow players to very easily farm up legendaries towards the end of the expansion. Overall for Legion there were so many good zones that anything that wasn't outright exceptional did end up standing out a bit. Next we're heading to Battle for Azeroth, a less liked expansion by the community, but one which I think most would agree had many fantastic zones to play through, quest in and explore. At the start of the expansion, each faction had an island with 3 different zones on that they would play through, and in my opinion all of these starting zones were great. In fact, similar to Legion, it's a piece of content which was added towards the end of the expansion that will be my pick here, and that will be for Mechagon Island. I reckon a lot of people would have gone for Nazjatar here instead, but I at least found that zone interesting with its different areas and content. Mechagon Island in comparison though just felt as though something was missing. It's supposed to be this island of super mechanical advancement and machines, but for me it just felt more like an island with loads of random bits of metal placed everywhere, and that at times it was a bit empty. Much like the previous zone, I don't think it was super bad by any means, but that would be my pick for BFA. Next up is the War Within, and I know we haven't seen everything from this expansion yet, I'm well aware, but in the other videos I've done similar to this I have included it, so I'm going to do it here as well. At the end of the day maybe my opinion will change between now and the end of the expansion, maybe it won't, who knows. Either way, with how the expansion has gone so far, it has several very strong zones, each of which could be someone's favourite with very good reason, which makes it pretty difficult to pick a least liked one. But that is the objective of the video, so I'm going to give it a go. So for the War Within, my pick so far will be Azj-Kahet. First up, I'm not overly a fan of underground zones when we have dragon riding. It just feels a bit confined given how fast we can move around the map, almost like we're being held back a bit. The second reason is it's trying to be Suramar 2.0. Now Suramar could legitimately be one of the best zones ever made in World of Warcraft. A visually amazing elven city with a progressive story over several patches where you couldn't fly at the start, filled with tons of content. Now the City of Threads within Azj-Kahet for me just doesn't match up. You can fly above any potential threats. It has much darker themes, which although fitting just aren't as appealing to me, and to be honest I don't really find Nerubians to be a very compelling ally within the game. Suramar was dealing with Nightborn elves in secret out of fear of their rebellion. In Azj-Kahet you kind of just fly up and start chatting with some giant spiders who are hanging around. It doesn't have that same element of risk that Suramar had in my opinion, so that's for me why Azj-Kahet has to be the pick for the War Within. Next is Dragonflight, and it's in quite a similar place to my pick for the War Within due to mixing an underground zone with dragon riding, so it won't come as a surprise that my choice is the Zaralek Caverns. Similar reasons to Azj-Kahet, but it did feel a bit more enclosed at times and that there was even less room to maneuver around. Dragonflight was another expansion with overall strong zone design though, so not really too much to add on to this, but that is my pick here. The next few, if you have noticed so far, are going to start going backwards in expansions once again, but now we have the entry from Warlords of Draenor, which doesn't really feel like an earlier version of WoW, but on November 13th this year, it will be 10 years old. Scary, right? As much as Warlords of Draenor regularly gets ragged on by the community for having about as much content as the average vanilla boss had mechanics, one thing it definitely did right was its zones, and the reimagined Draenor was really something to behold, which makes me kind of surprised in myself that it even finds itself towards the middle to lower end of this list. But the zone that didn't quite pay off in Warlords of Draenor for me was Tanaan Jungle. So Tanaan Jungle was what I would call this this expansion's Timeless Isle. Of course, the Timeless Isle was first done in Mists of Pandaria, and for me that basically means a zone with tons of stuff to do and to collect, from achievements to mounts, pet battles, currencies and so on. But for me, Tanan Jungle was just not really a place I wanted to go back to again and again. I think mainly due to the colour scheme, the amount of obstacles that were always in front of you, and to be honest, I also reckon it was partially because aside from the raid or PvP, you were going to be spending a lot of time in this place on your way to the next expansion. The same could be said for the Timeless Isle, of course, but again, it's just a preference thing as a whole. Next up is Cataclysm, and I bet you were waiting for this one. If there is anything overly controversial in this video, this may just be the one. So Cataclysm, as we all know, is the expansion known for having a certain zone which people either really love or hate. This is of course Vashj'ir, World of Warcraft's first and probably only ever fully underwater zone. And it is not the worst Cataclysm zone in my opinion. Not the best either, it would be somewhere in the middle for me. I think ultimately it was an interesting idea, but having that extra vertical movement axis was just too different from the normal format. So ultimately I would understand if they never wanted to commit to making another zone like this. But for Cataclysm, from all the new zones in the expansion, I'm probably going to have to pick the island of Tol Barad. The reasons are that it's not really connected to anything in the world, you kind of just teleport there from a random portal. It's got a very bland appearance. I mean, it is a giant prison on an island in the middle of nowhere, so objective complete I guess, but still. The main reasons to be there were for the dailies, which were pretty simple to do. After that you had the raid of course, and then the PvP and the battle for Tol Barad. And I remember the battle for Tol Barad was pretty bad back in the day, and now having redone it in Cata Classic, I can once again confirm it is still pretty bad. A rotation of a mass of unorganized players between several different bases which you are supposed to hold, where more than half the time the game ends after a few minutes because nobody wants to run the timer all the way down on defense, they just want the attackers to win so they can get out of there. Now we move on to Vanilla, which, I mean, sure, it's not an expansion, but it's a version of World of Warcraft, and a pretty huge one at that. Now without a doubt Vanilla has some amazing zones, but in that massive world it created, there are some which aren't quite as good. The pick for me, and I think this is just about the most basic pick for Vanilla, but it's that for a reason, is Desolus. I mean, come on, they made a massive flat grey bunch of nothing and said, wow, this place is so desolate. Why don't we just name it after that? Now, to be fair, Desolus is a fairly good leveling zone for both Horde and Alliance if you know how to navigate it and pick up all the quests where needed. And if you're using a questing guide, they're always gonna send you here. The issues for me are, well, first of all, the appearance of the place, as I've already mentioned. It's not a very nice place to be for too long. Second is that it hits those levels just before you get a mount, so you have to run this whole place on foot. This means you get a really good opportunity to soak in the sights of Desolus, such as the Kodo Graveyard or the wildlife of the zone. Speaking of that, why is mob density so bizarrely high in some places, on top of having mobs which have crazy level ranges barely a few hundred yards apart? Oftentimes in Vanilla, I'll opt for a few dungeons instead of coming here, as it can be an optional zone if you want it to be, and I am thankful for that. Next up is another old expansion, in fact, the first expansion, the Burning Crusade. So I think for most people this is a close one between Hellfire Peninsula and Blade's Edge Mountain. I think out of the two zones, however, Hellfire Peninsula isn't as bad. It is the first zone you're coming into for the Burning Crusade, you start to upgrade your gear, maybe you do anyway, and there are dungeons which are great to do and easy to access as soon as you're there, and then afterwards you get to carry on into Zangarmarsh quite soon, which means for me my pick for TBC will go to Blade's Edge Mountains. One of the problems with TBC leveling is that it was always very linear, so on your regular playthrough you're going to have to experience the wonders of Blade's Edge Mountains, which means having to go up and down the valley in the center several times in a row to hand in and complete some quests. There are several quests with weird items, especially from that gnome area, Alliance players will know, that aren't exactly intuitive to use. And whilst you're there, you're not going to have flying yet either. All in all, this makes it a less than fun place to be. Fortunately, you don't have to finish the entire zone to be high enough level to progress onwards, but getting to Blade's Edge Mountain for me is always a short visit, which means the second to last entry is from Wrath of the Lich King. Wrath had some absolute banger zones. Howling Fjord, despite the incredibly annoying quests early on, still remains a favourite for me. Sholazar Basin is great, and of course the good old Grizzly Hills. And there's so many good zones that the ones which aren't as good really end up standing out. Fortunately though, by the time Wrath came out, there were more quests in zones than experience needed to level cap, so you could basically skip entire zones and be just fine. Oh, and we also had heirlooms and bonus XP effects, those help too. But the zone I'm talking about here for Wrath is Gundrak. Gundrak has one singular redeeming feature, and that is the Amphitheater of Anguish. It's always fun to do, very worthwhile, loads of XP, great reward at the end, but it's just not enough by itself. Gundrak has a dark and gloomy atmosphere, mobs which are strangely just far enough away from one another to be inconvenient, but above all it has the Drakuru questline. This questline is the answer to the question, do you want to not play your character and do vehicle quests for the next 90 minutes? If yes, I have great news for you. I can't think of a single questline in this entire game which was worse to do. When doing Lawmaster of Northrend, it was without a doubt the lowest point at leveling in the game for me, and for the majority of my characters in Wrath, I just did a few quests at the start of Gundrak which were well laid out, and then I'd only ever come back here for the dungeons. Which means in first place or last place, depending on how you're looking at it, is the zone where I really never want to go, and that is from the Shadowlands. And I bet you already know where I'm gonna pick. That's right, it's quite literally hell on Azeroth, the Moor. I mean, technically the Moor should be the last place anyone would want to be, so it being a terrible place is Blizzard having done a good job? With some of these other zones that I wasn't a fan of, sometimes you could skip them, or you didn't really have to be there, they were just there for extra stuff that you could do within the game. This was not the case with the Moor, as it was directly tied to a number of progression points for your character, so you had to go to the Moor, and at the start you couldn't even mount. In fact, do you remember early on in Shadowlands, people would put war mode on just outside of Venari's refuge and gank people for the weekly quest, so Blizzard had to give everyone invisibility so you could actually get out into the zone. What a great start. But then you ventured out into this rather large zone on foot, and it wasn't the case that you couldn't fly, you straight up couldn't mount here at the start of the expansion. They added mounts sometime later in a patch though. There were all the hallmarks of inconvenience too. High mob density, verticality that could make getting across the zone difficult, and an all too fitting colour palette of black, grey and red. For what it was almost so bad it was good in a weird way, but the Moor was one of the reasons that I checked out of Shadowlands at a very early stage, and really, I don't think I missed much. But those are just my choices, the worst zone from each expansion of World of Warcraft so far. Let me know, what are your worst ones? Do you agree with what I went for here, or are any of these not so bad in your opinion? Also, do you want to see a best zone type video too? I could definitely make that happen. But as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I shall see you all in the next one very soon. Dungeons, that 5-player content that gets you into the world of PvE in World of Warcraft. From humble beginnings in the Deadmines or Ragefire Chasm, all the way to today in Modern WoW, with whole tournaments based around who can complete the highest level Mythic Plus keys. Whether it was for a quest, the loot, or just to see what was behind that blue swirly entrance. Dungeons have always been a core part of World of Warcraft, and many of them are amazing. However, some of them are not so good. But which are the best and which are the worst? Well, today I'm going to be covering what for me was the worst dungeon of each expansion in World of Warcraft so far. I'll be doing this in order, and we're going to be going by order of dungeons from least bad to I hope I never see this one again, not by order of expansions. So dungeons at the start of the video aren't so bad for their expansion, but I do have to pick one. expansion, and the ones at the end will be the dungeons that I hope I never see when I hit the LFD button. So that's it, one dungeon per expansion has to be picked. Let's make a start. But first, a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Factor 75. Factor 75 are a bit of a regular on this channel at this to be Battle for Azeroth. BFA really didn't have a bad dungeon overall in my opinion. And yes, before you think this is me secretly preparing you for BFA Classic wouldn't be so bad. For real though, it had a lot of very solid entries. I didn't even mind Tolda Gore, and I think that's the dungeon people have a problem with in BFA. The real annoying part of it was Sanguine Week during Mythic Plus, but there was a small trick you could do called not doing the dungeon that week, and you never had to do that. But the worst dungeon of BFA for me had to be part of Operation Mechagon, specifically the outside part. The inside bit was fine, to be honest, and remember, it was a two-part dungeon, kind of like how Return to Karazhan was in Legion. It just felt like there was a lot of roaming trash, and it was annoying to have to dodge stuff and you were rushing in between each bosses rather than progressing through a dungeon in kind of a normal sense. And just full on using an open zone for a dungeon doesn't quite work in my opinion. We're going to see this be a recurring theme throughout the video, by the way, and I'd rather see some kind of different environment or things change in a way that we haven't seen before, or at least a new part of the zone in a cave or over a hill or just a new island, something that's a bit fresh basically. Still, it's not a terrible dungeon by any stretch of the imagination, and BFA was a strong expansion when it came to 5-man content for me, but that's my pick here. Next up is Vanilla, and sure, it's not an expansion, but it is a version of World of Warcraft, and it had a whole lot of 5-man content. And for Vanilla specifically, I didn't want to pick a dungeon which realistically is off limits to Horde and Alliance. In other words, I'm not going to pick either Stockades or Ragefire Chasm, but all in all for Vanilla, after quite a bit of thought, what I'm going to pick are in fact the Razorfen dungeons, and this just goes for both of them. Now, I will admit, I didn't want to pick something that was off limits to either faction, but me picking these dungeons is definitely the result of me playing Alliance more often than not. Both of these dungeons are pretty annoying to get to, they don't have many quests, the Quillball just feel like a kind of average enemy. Still, these dungeons aren't too bad, and there's definitely some very good loot in them, so that's a reason to go there. Then again, I do have to pick one dungeon per expansion, so that is going to be the choice for Vanilla. Next up, I have Shadowlands, and there's going to be a lot of the more recent expansions near the top of the list, and I think that goes to show that dungeon design has improved over time in general. Well, at least for me it has. And Shadowlands might be a bit more of a look down upon expansion, but the dungeons as a whole weren't too bad in there, I don't think. But for Shadowlands, I've picked Mists of Turner Scythe, and the reason is basically the maze. I don't understand the maze, and I have no idea what's going on in that dungeon, and I found some of the boss fights kind of annoying in there as well. Really, there isn't too much to comment on it other than that, but if ever I had a choice for which dungeon I'd be loading in for the Shadowlands, this will be the one that I'd want to see the least. Following that is Warlords of Draenor, another harshly criticized expansion, but again another one with pretty good dungeons as a whole. The big divider in opinions for Warlords of Draenor is absolutely going to be Grim Rail Depot, which was Blizzard attempting to have a dungeon on a moving train. It was a pretty tight space, there wasn't a lot of room to maneuver, but I thought as a whole it was okay and it fit the theme that they were going for in the first place. I suppose we should be kind of glad there wasn't Mythic Plus back then. If Tolda Gore was a nightmare on Sanguine, just imagine this place, it would have been impossible. But if I have to pick a worse one, I'm going to pick Iron Docks, and I think it's just because of the kind of minor annoyances that you have in the dungeon, such as when you're running through that gauntlet type part of it and you're being fired at and then you have to hide and then one person gets left behind. The fact that the last boss in the dungeon has to constantly talk as you're progressing through it, and I don't know about you, but I pretty much always have game sounds on, so I remember that very vividly. And when you get to the last boss, they knock you back 2 or 3 times during the fight and you have to run back up to them again, dodging stuff. Overall, it's really not that bad of a dungeon though, but if I have to pick, it is this one. Next is the War Within, and for me, the worst dungeon of this expansion so far is the Dawnbreaker, and it's similar reasoning to the pick for the outside of Operation Mechagon in BFA. It's another open world zone with bad guys, but this time you have to fly in between stuff. Personally, I'd rather be on the ground for dungeons rather than flying. At least you can follow along a bit easier with where you're supposed to be going, and I find flying can be a bit confusing in terms of route, which trash packs to clear and so on. And as already talked about, it's just using an open zone for a dungeon, which I'd rather not see. I'd rather have something a little bit different. I suppose the whole zone is used in this case because you are flying and we have dragon riding, which is super fast. So if this were a regular sized dungeon, you'd be in the air for a couple of seconds before you land again, at which point why even have flying? So with that in mind for the War Within, you're never gonna guess what I'm gonna pick for Dragonflight. Yep, it's the Knockhood Offensive. In fact, Dawnbreaker and Knockhood are kind of interchangeable for me. They both work in a very similar way to one another, where there's a lot of flying in between stuff. Except in Knockhood you had that one mob who would yell "let fly" at you every 3 nanoseconds, and that is the big differentiator between the two for me. Again, not exactly a bad dungeon, but one that I'd have to pick for reasons I've really already gone over. Which brings us to what is kind of the halfway point of the video, at least expansions wise. All of the dungeons so far were the least good of their respective expansions, but there was nothing overall too bad, nothing that I'd mind doing too much. The expansions and dungeons that remain, however, are where things start to get really bad. And we're going to start off with Wrath of the Lich King and the dungeon that everyone loves to hate, the Oculus. Oh man, back in Wrath originally, when you saw this bad boy on your loading screen in the LFG, there was a pretty good chance somebody would just instantly leave rather than sit through this nightmare. The funny thing is, Oculus is actually one of the fastest dungeons to complete in Wrath, and Blizzard even added extra rewards to it in Wrath Classic to make people want to sit it out. You see, and I'm sure we can all agree with this, the problem with the Oculus wasn't me, it was everyone else. And it only took one person to really not want to learn what to do for this dungeon to be way more difficult than it needed to be. People just don't want to learn new abilities on a mount. Some people weren't used to having a vertical hitbox when flying to different platforms. You all know how it goes, you get to one of the platforms on the Oculus, you look behind you and somebody's bringing a whole conga line of dragons and you've already dismounted and you might wipe now. But above all that, the Oculus was a dungeon that really emphasized vehicle combat, and Wrath was full of it to be fair, but to have leveled your character, learned all your abilities, got your enchants and so on, and then you finally get into a dungeon and the game says, okay, now get on this vehicle and press about 2 buttons. It's just bad design in my opinion. And since I picked the Oculus for Wrath, that means I've left Violet Hold open as a choice for Legion, and it is the clear choice for Legion. Overall, there were so many good dungeons in this expansion, and it was Blizzard's first go at Mythic Plus 2, and since then they've had a lot more thought in designing dungeons around this feature, but for a first attempt it was pretty good. Violet Hold on the other hand is just boring. I'm glad they didn't ever include it in the Mythic Plus rotation either during Legion. It's a room where trash packs spawn and then you wait and then you kill a trash pack and then you wait some more and then another spawns and eventually a boss spawns and you kill the boss and you repeat 3 times, and that is the entire dungeon. A magical prison is such a cool idea for a dungeon. In fact, Legion did the whole magical prison thing right with Vault of the Wardens, and yet for some reason we're reusing Dalaran, so I guess we're reusing Violet Hold, which is just a relic of Wrath of the Lich King, which we really could have done without. Which brings us to the unenviable spot of the top 3, and these 3 dungeons are really just on a different level of bad from everything else so far. First up is the entry from the Burning Crusade, and it is the Black Morass, aka opening of the Dark Portal. A trip back in time to ensure Medivh can open the Dark Portal. Now that sounds like an awesome premise for a dungeon, and then we get there and oh no, it's Violet Hold, kill X, wait again for a boss, kill the boss, repeat 3 times. But this time we've put the portals where the mobs spawn just far away from each other where you need to mount up each time. And this time you're in a lovely swamp setting alongside mobs that can daze you, water that can dismount you, and it even felt as though you had to wait longer in between stuff happening than the Violet Hold. I really feel bad for people who had to farm this place again and again for their Hourglass of the Unraveler trinket at the start of TBC Classic. This dungeon for me was I'm here to do the attunement and then I never want to come back. Which brings us to the top 2 worst dungeons, the loading screens that make me strongly consider having a sudden emergency and needing to leave the group. And the expansion in second place is Mists of Pandaria. Mists of Pandaria is an expansion where people have really 180'd their opinion on it from when it existed back in the day to nowadays. But I'm gonna be honest, it did not have very good dungeons. Realistically here, I could pick any of Siege of New Zao Temple, Gate of the Setting Sun, or Storm Stout Brewery, but all of those pale in comparison to the worst dungeon of Mists of Pandaria, which for me is Temple of the Jade Serpent. Wow, this dungeon is just bad. You start off and you head left through a gauntlet into Wise Mori, who is easily one of the most boring boss designs Blizzard had ever put in the game, where you enter his room and he occasionally remembers that you are there and spawns a water elemental which you can evaporate in about 2 seconds before standing around and waiting for him to do this again. And then you have to go all the way back through to the entrance for some reason, because they just decided you should backtrack in this dungeon. I'm not a fan of backtracking. Then you get another full room of trash and you finally get to the second boss, where it's a bedtime story with a Pandaren while you wait for the second boss to spawn. Eventually, once you've heard the story, which you've probably heard a bunch of times already, so you're just waiting for it to be over, you can blow up the boss in a few seconds before you have to randomly run through a place with absolutely no trash to get to the final area. After that, the last 2 bosses are fine, to be honest. As I said in Mists of Pandaria, it was a close call with so many dungeons involving bosses with I go immune now mechanics and you needing to wait for RP. For Temple of the Jade Serpent, the first half of the dungeon especially really spoils it. There's a lot of waiting and a lot of backtracking, and for me this makes it a pretty poor dungeon experience. Which means last but not least is the entry from Cataclysm. How fresh it is in my mind now playing Cata Classic, and the choice here is easily Throne of the Tides. This dungeon just does an impressive number of things wrong. So you clear out a few trash packs and then you go straight into one of the longest lifts in the game. It feels about a solid minute or so of just standing and waiting there for the damn thing to come all the way back down again. And then you fight all the way through to the first boss, Lady Najjar, even though she should clearly be the last boss for lore reasons. More on this later. And this is perhaps the only dungeon ever where the lore has bothered me, by the way. We deal with her, we fight some old god squid boy, and then have to backtrack through the entire dungeon via the teleporter up to where the dungeon splits in 3 directions again. Backtracking, as I've already mentioned, just feels bad, and if it's an intended route through the dungeon, it feels like they just didn't plan it properly. I mean, there's backtracking in places such as Black Rock Depths, but BRD isn't a literal hallway. There are so many reasons to take different routes through the place, so it works there. In Throne, it's just annoying. I mean, they've had to put a teleporter there because they were like, damn, otherwise they're literally just going to have to run back through the entire dungeon that they've already done. And then there is an optional boss on the right hand side with some rather annoying trash in front of it, but that's fine. I can't say I've ever needed an item from this boss, so I didn't have to try and convince people to go this way, but if your Prebis was down here, I can imagine if you were pugging this dungeon a bunch, half the time the tank just straight up ignored you and took the left instead. And the left is down to the final boss, Neptulon. So I don't know if you've ever completed Vashia as a zone. I've done it a few times, and I think it's really not as bad as people make it out to be. Anyways, at the end of the zone there's a huge battle between the forces of the Naga and the Tide Lord, Neptulon. And Neptulon loses. Big time. In fact, it's a total disaster. The last you see of him in Vashia, he's lost his realm to the Naga and has a huge kraken stuck to his face, which all in all is probably not a good time. So when you finally get to him and throw in the tides and his first comment is, my fearless assistance, considering your character has never even spoken to him or met him, is just a bit of a question mark moment. Neptulon, you literally just lost a devastating battle and had a sea monster on your face, and you finally get to him in the dungeon and he's like, well, you took your time, to be honest. And to top it off, his fight is absolutely terrible. Some of the waves are 1 elite at a time and some other ones are 3 non-elite Murlocs. Like, damn, should we set up a CC rotation here? This is insane. Before in the final phase, Neptulon juices you up, quite literally, and you defeat the Kraken Ozumat. Even though you don't properly defeat him, he doesn't die, he just kind of runs off. I think the last we saw of him was during Najutar and BFA as far as I know. Anyways, all in all, it's both a disappointing end of zone story and a disappointing dungeon, which no other piece of 5-player content has managed to be ever in this game. And I do understand why the story's like this before I see the inevitable comments about it. Obviously, the end of Ashir was setting up for the Abyssal Maw raid, and there's even an instance portal where it would have been right next to the entrance to the Throne of the Tides. But Blizzard never got around to doing it because of, well, everything else they were doing in Kata, a large part of which was redesigning the old world. So we're just left with leftover bits that were put together in ultimately the worst dungeon World of Warcraft has ever produced. And that for me is the worst dungeon of each expansion so far. Now, I could have just done a top 10 type thing worst dungeon video, but there would have been at least 2 from TBC and probably 3 from Mists of Pandaria. So I decided instead I'll do 1 from each expansion and try and get a bit of variety in here. Though I could always do that in the future, let me know if you want to see that. Equally, I could do the best dungeon from every expansion, definitely down for that as well. But what did you think? What would be your list? Would you pick different dungeons? Did you agree? Let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you on the next one very soon. Over many years, Blizzard has introduced so many different systems, patches, updates, and changes to the world of Warcraft. Some of them have become defining features of the game that have been carried forward and well remembered by so many of us. Others are things that have been left behind and that we'd probably sooner forget. But what were the best features and what were the worst? Today I'm going to be covering what I feel was the worst feature of each of World of Warcraft's expansions so far. And yes, this will be fully in my own opinion, so I'm expecting people to agree or maybe disagree on some points. But with all that said, there's 10 expansions to get through and a lot of years of content. For me, these have to be the worst features in each World of Warcraft expansion. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor, Boot.dev. Boot.dev is a platform dedicated to teaching and taking your time is key in this field of work, and if eventually it proves to be something day in 04 and 5 and then it's re-released in Classic in 2019, and those two things are very, very different experiences. The worst feature of vanilla originally was the fact that I still had to go to school and couldn't play the game all day, but really, how can I criticize a time so steeped in nostalgia? On its re-release in 2019 though, I do think Classic started to show that there were some decisions in the game that didn't quite hold up as well these days. So for the worst feature of vanilla, I'm going to go on the artificial restrictions that are placed on the game by the developers. And what I mean by this are just numbers which can't go above certain points. Take for example the debuff cap in vanilla. Originally you could only have 8 debuffs on a target at one time. There was of course 40-man raiding, and one player could do half of those debuffs pretty easily, and I can only imagine back in the day it would have been an absolute mess of just people overriding each other's debuffs. In patch 1.7, around when ZG was released, they raised this debuff cap from 8 to 16. This did make things a bit more flexible, but really it was still the case that you were only allowed to apply debuffs which were benefiting the whole raid, such as Curse of Recklessness, Sunder Armor, and so on. Serpent Sting? Nope. Moonfire? Nope. Corruption as a warlock? Maybe if you're lucky. In future expansions they'd raise the debuff cap to where basically it wouldn't apply anymore, but I don't think it was the best feature in vanilla. Along the lines of restrictions, there was also a buff cap where you could only have 32 buffs at one time. Sounds pretty excessive, but if you're fully buffed up using all the world buffs and consumables, you can reasonably hit that number whilst you're in a raid. And for example, if you were playing a restoration druid and you wanted to use rejuvenation on a warrior, you would actively be griefing them by giving them the possibility of removing more important buffs. That was the state of some classes in vanilla. Again, a lot of buffs were consolidated and world buffs were removed in future expansions, so that wasn't a problem anymore. And the final restriction that's definitely worth a mention for vanilla has to be spell batching. On vanilla's re-release in 2019, Blizzard recreated this system where effectively spell inputs had up to a forced half a second delay. This did try to emulate how things were back in the day, but it just ended up being really scuffed. This spell batching window essentially meant that spells were dealt with in a group every half a second rather than being resolved as soon as possible. So what this meant is sometimes, for example, you could land a heal on a tank, you spend your mana, but the batching window hasn't occurred yet, so you lose all your mana and the tank dies anyway. I think it was an interesting idea to try it again, it just didn't work. The Burning Crusade. On we ventured through the dark portal into a mysterious alien world. This was back in the good old days of midnight releases and queuing outside your local game store to pick up a copy. Things were very different back then, and they were different in the game as well. One of the most defining features of the Burning Crusade has to have been attunements. Now I've gone on record a bunch of times and said, actually, I think attunements are pretty good, and I'll stand by that, they are pretty good. The first time, when you're going through them with your guild,
Speak quickly. I am forsaken. I'm listening. Careful there. Do not tempt my wrath. I'm not amused. What is it? Speak. What now? Speak quickly. Victory for Sylvanus. Speak quickly. Embrace the shadow. Hello. Trust no one. This had better be good. What now?
Fear. I think they're really underwhelming model-wise. When people saw a dragon race, they thought back to the hulking draconids that you get in Blackwing Lair in earlier versions of the game. I mean, if there was an option to have a skinnier one and then a bulkier one, it would have been fine, but there is no option. You're just some salamander-looking boy. On top of that, it's like Blizzard just forgot about how many years they've gone through trying to make druids' forms look cool and customizable, because when you enter combat as a Drakthir, you're forced into your dragon form where you can't even see your armor. Imagine being the guy who has to make tier sets for Drakthea knowing that they're never going to see them in the first place. For an expansion where so many things were done right, it just seems like they missed the mark thematically on this new race. As far as I know, in the War Within you can stay in combat in your Visage form, and maybe even one day they'll open up other races to becoming evokers. If they do, that's an easy paid race change for me, by the way, Blizzard, I'm just telling you. But for Dragonflight, it has to be Drakthea. And finally, the War Within. Yeah, we're super early on into the expansion, I know we haven't seen the full content by any means, but I guess that's where we are at the moment, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna throw something here in the video just as some early thoughts on the expansion. And my pick for the War Within so far has to be underground zones. So there's two that I'm thinking of in particular. Okay, yes, there are 3 underground zones technically in the War Within, but Hallowfall just doesn't feel like you're underground because the skybox is absolutely enormous and you've got the big lava lamp looking thing in the sky anyway to keep the lights on and make things feel a bit more bright and vibrant. But Ashkahet and the Ringing Deeps, yeah, not so keen on them. The thing is with underground zones is nowadays we have dragon riding, or sky riding I suppose, and this form of flight is just so fast and agile that when you're underground there's all these pillars everywhere in the way, you can't necessarily go over things, and it just feels a bit cramped for how quickly we can move around the map now. If you look at how Blizzard designed Dragonflight with its huge wide open zones with all these wonderful skyboxes and vistas, you can really tell how they played into that. And yes, there was the Zaralite Caverns in Dragonflight of course, and I pretty much have the same comment for that. It just felt a bit cramped when we're so agile nowadays. But for the War Within, my pick is going to be underground zones. And hopefully that is the worst thing I have to say about it. Though we'll see if any more get added in the future, you never know. But that's it, what I feel as though was the worst feature of every single version of World of Warcraft so far. Let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Was there anything completely different that you would have picked? Drop it down in the comments down below. Oh, and I'm already planning on doing the opposite version of this video where I go over my favourite thing in each expansion, so look out for that one pretty soon. But, as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.
What is it?
Recently I did my worst feature of each expansion video, which you should totally check out, I'll link it below. And I already knew whilst I was making that I wanted to do the opposite and talk about what for me was the best feature of each expansion too. With World of Warcraft coming up to its 20th anniversary this year, there are so many things to celebrate about this game, and its many additions that have been added throughout the expansions, which have kept, certainly me, and many others coming back again and again. So let's do this. One-ish of the best features from each expansion World of Warcraft has seen in its near 20-year history. Starting from the start in vanilla then, of course. And this has to be the easiest one on this list for me by a mile, because vanilla for me has always been about the leveling journey, and I think that's the thing which it does better than any other expansion, and that remains true to this day. Where it's different here is that it just starts in a way that no other expansion can emulate, because they are all expansions. They're starting you when you're at the previous level cap, you're geared up, you have a bunch of gold and so on. In vanilla, when you make a new character, that's it. You're level 1, you have none of your abilities, and you have the entire world in front of you. You're a small character in a big world which can eventually do great things. The level leveling can be slow, it can be grueling, I'm not going to argue with that, but it certainly is rewarding. And that feeling of starting as a small character and gradually rising your way up through the ranks, in levels, abilities, in gear and so on, are all part of what make the vanilla leveling experience so memorable. Also, the actual world in vanilla, as in Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor, is absolutely massive too, and it really lends itself to the scope of this journey. But for vanilla, the best feature has to be the leveling. Onto the Burning Crusade then, World of Warcraft's first expansion, and many changes being made to the game. And for TBC, I'm probably going to pick something a bit different from what most of people would have picked. And my choice for the best feature of Burning Crusade as an expansion is actually going to be the tier set appearances. There's one exception to this, which is the Season 4 Brutal Gladiator set, and that was because with all the other PvP seasons, they just recolored the PvE set, but in Season 4 they didn't have the chance to do this because Sunwell just added new tier pieces to tier 6. So as a result, we're just going to pretend that Season 4 gear just doesn't exist and look at everything else that was made in TBC. Now the tier set bonuses back then tended to be pretty boring, to be honest. They were just a few more percentages on a damaging ability or something. But appearance wise, pretty much everything in TBC just looks amazing. And if Cata and Beyond you're transmogging into anything from TBC, you're doing something right in my book. There are just so many iconic sets that really fit with each class's feel. You have the Malefic set for Warlocks with the wings that pop out when you jump, Paladin's Lightbringer with a halo, Warrior's Onslaught set with its spikes and how well it matches up with the Bulwark of Azinoth. TBC sets were so good, they reimagined them and brought them back during Tier 20, the Tomb of Sargeras during Legion. You know, Blizzard, you could get away with reimagining basically every tier set from TBC, and I'm pretty sure people will love that. Next up, Wrath of the Lich King, an expansion which changed a lot in the world of Warcraft. And maybe one which, having replayed it now in Classic, people have come to have different opinions on what was so good about Wrath of the Lich King. But my choice for this expansion has to be the alt friendliness that it introduced. Now, with warbands in the War Within, making this statement is kind of difficult right now because warbands are just so much better in, well, pretty much every single way imaginable, but back then Wrath of the Lich King was the peak for player alt friendliness, and it also being the peak for subcounts as a result ain't much of a surprise. The word Flavor of the Month reroller became popular during Wrath because big class changes came with each major patch, and people could really quickly switch from one class onto the new and overpowered one. You could easily gear up through heroics, though there was no looking for dungeon system till towards the end of the expansion, and there was a lot of standing around in Dalaran spamming need a tank. Tier 7 was so easy that practically anybody could get through it and pick up some degree of gear between 10 and 25 man. There was the Vault of Archivon for some more epics, and the emblem system to give you a way to eventually work towards pieces of gear. People even called epics back then welfare epics because items were just so plentiful and easy to get. Wrath of the Lich King for the time was the moment when the game became the most alt friendly, and the fact